Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into a significant study. It analyzes myocarditis cases after both SARS-CoV-2 infection and COVID-19 vaccination.
That's right. We've got quite a mix of sources here. Reanalyzed clinical trial data, post-marketing surveillance, observational studies.
A whole range. And our goal really is to unpack what this particular study found and how it, addresses some common claims out there.
Exactly. And this study zooms in on some really critical questions, doesn't it? Like, did the virus, even Omicron, cause more myocarditis than the vaccines?
Right, that's a big one.
And is vaccine myocarditis always sort of mild and rare, no long-term effects?
Yeah, that narrative.
And then the big picture. Does the whole risk-benefit analysis for the vaccine still stand up based on this specific piece of research? Lots to unpack.
Okay, so let's start with that first point. The claim that the virus itself, SARS-CoV-2 and Omicron, caused more myocarditis than the mRNA vaccines. This study challenges that directly.
It does. What's interesting is how they challenge it. They synthesized evidence from, well, all those sources we mentioned.
Not just one angle.
No. For example, they looked at reanalyses of clinical trial data, which seemed to show a clearer link and maybe higher rates post-vaccination compared to just the background risk during infection periods. So by combining those reevaluations with the real-world surveillance data gathered after the vaccines rolled out and large population studies,
Okay.
their conclusion is that the evidence doesn't really support the idea that infection caused more myocarditis.
Right. Okay, so moving on then. A very, very common message we heard was, okay, if myocarditis happens after the vaccine, it's usually mild, it's transient, super rare. This study pushes back on that.
It definitely does. It tackles that mild, transient, rare idea head on. They're not just looking at numbers, but also the clinical picture, what doctors were seeing, and even the immunological response.
So like how the body reacts.
Precisely. They bring in epidemiological data, patterns in large populations, but also the clinical details and the immune system aspect.
And what did that combined view suggest?
Well, it suggested that this picture of it being uniformly mild or without lasting impact, it might not fully capture the reality based on the evidence they reviewed.
Okay, that's significant. And if the mild and rare idea is being questioned, that must feed into how they looked at the overall risk versus benefit, right?
Absolutely. It leads directly to that.
Yeah.
The study flags the documented risk of actual myocardial damage.
Muscle damage.
Yes. And they specifically draw attention to younger males, under 40.
Why that group specifically?
Their analysis suggested the risk of vaccine-associated myocarditis seemed, well, more pronounced in that demographic.
I see.
And if you have a higher risk in a specific group, especially a younger, generally healthier group, it forces you to reevaluate that risk-benefit balance. Does the benefit strongly outweigh this identified risk for them? They argue maybe not, based on their findings.
And they don't just raise a flag, do they? The study goes further and makes a concrete recommendation.
That's right. It's a pretty stark conclusion, based purely on their analysis of the risks they documented, particularly that risk of myocardial damage.
Especially in younger men.
Especially in that group, yes. They conclude their paper by recommending that government should actually remove the COVID-19 mRNA products from the market.
Wow, okay. So let's just quickly recap the main thrust of this study. First, it argues the data doesn't back the claim that the virus caused more myocarditis than the vaccines.
Right.
Second, it challenges the description of vaccine-induced myocarditis as always being mild and rare.
Yes, questions that characterization.
And third, because of the risks identified, particularly for younger males, it questions the prevailing risk-benefit assessment and calls for market removal.
That sums it up well, which, really leaves us with something to consider. Well, think about it. Here we have a study pulling together different kinds of research, and it arrives at findings that seem to directly contradict some widespread public health messaging on a really important issue.
Yeah, that's true.
So the question that kind of leaves hanging is, what does this kind of analysis, this synthesis, make you wonder about how scientific understanding evolves, or maybe how public health advice gets shaped and communicated? Definitely food for thought.